Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 789, and today is April 23rd, 2025. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. We got a good amount of news to get through on today's show, so I'm going to jump right into it. Just want to remind people to share this show, hosted at the Libertarian Institute, reposted on the blog at antiwar.com, YouTube, Rumble, and Odysee for the video version of the show. It's up anywhere you can listen to audio podcasts, and follow me on Twitter for all my work, including all the articles I write, which I post pretty shortly after I write them. The handle is at @KyleAnzalone_. And of course, on my Twitter page and on YouTube and everywhere else, you can also find the all-new Kyle Anzalone Show. Today, I will be interviewing Keaton Weiss from the Do Dissidents podcast, and I'm really looking forward to this one, so be sure to subscribe to that show. Let's get into the news today. First up here, Russia welcomes U.S. statement on ruling out joining NATO, and a second article here, report claims Putin willing to halt Ukraine invasion along current front lines. So I find these two articles really interesting from Dave. And the first one getting into, saying that the statements from Washington that Ukraine isn't going to join NATO are now sufficient, or Russia is happy with them, I think is really important. If you look at the reason why Russia invaded Ukraine, NATO membership for Kiev was absolutely on the top of the list. There's a new article out today from Scott Horton at antiwar.com. It's an excerpt from his book, Provoked. And I wrote the intro from that, and I take that story about Russia being happy with the Ukraine NATO membership idea, and then Scott's book goes into the William Burns net means net memo, and just really explains that, this is a long-standing Russian position that Ukraine becoming a member of the North Atlantic Alliance is just a step too far from Moscow. Whether it's true or not, they believe this is essential to their national security. That's their assessment. That's the thinking in the Kremlin. And so for decades, we knew that if we pushed for Ukraine to join NATO, it would provoke a Russian invasion of Ukraine. And Russia is saying that issue, that they now feel comfortable with the American position. And then additionally, this story about Putin willing to halt Ukraine invasion along current front lines, I think go to show that Russia is hearing what is coming out of President Trump and Secretary of State Marco Rubio's mouth, and that the Kremlin is serious about trying to get diplomatic settlement to the end of this war. Now, I don't think that means that the Kremlin is going to be willing to make a ton of compromises to get that done, just that they are willing to engage in the process that Donald Trump is laying out. I think these are good signs that we could be moving in the right direction on Ukraine talks. But again, once you actually get into the details, once you actually start talking about these provinces, particularly, I believe Luhansk is almost all in Russia control. But then, you go to Donetsk, which is only majority, I think about 2/3 in Russia control. But Zaporizhia and Kherson, with I think are far more close to half in Russian control. What's going to happen with these territories? How much of Ukraine is Ukraine going to be able to keep? These are major questions. And of course, even if Russia is moving into a more reasonable position, it doesn't necessarily mean that Kiev will as well, and that could always scuttle and kill the talks. It seems that Donald Trump is just increasingly frustrated with the situation overall, and so even if it's not necessarily Russia, even if Moscow is willing to move forward with talks, if Kiev isn't, maybe at this point Trump will just throw his hands in the air and try to wash himself out the problem altogether, which would be a negative. Of course, if the U.S. stops giving Ukraine arms, that will force Ukraine into negotiations. So there's a lot that could play out here, but I do see those two stories as positive signs. Next up here, getting into this one that I wrote for the Libertarian Institute on April 21st. Israel deploying unmanned bulldozers in Gaza. So the Israeli military is increasingly opted to deploy an unmanned version of the Caterpillar's D9 bulldozer to a number of battlefields. The remotely operated system allows the IDF to flatten areas without risking additional troops. According to the Times of Israel, Tel Aviv has deployed the unmanned D9, or Robdozer. It's Robdozer. I only spell that out because I feel like it really should be the robo-dozer. And as much as I don't want to, make a joke out of this, because what these machines are doing in Gaza is absolutely horrific, it does seem to be quite the missed opportunity not to call it the robo-dozer. So they have been deployed to Gaza and Lebanon following the Israeli military operations on October 3rd or October 7th, 2023. And Israeli officials say the IDF is ramping up its use of the system. One source told AFP Israel has used robotic tools for over a decade, but in very small numbers. Now they're being used in large-scale warfare. The robo-dozer was developed by Israel Aerospace Industries, which claims the platform is the ultimate combat bulldozer. IAI's website explains that the robo-dozer's integration into the military engineering units specifically boosts the capability to rapidly alter landscapes in favor of offensive or defensive operations. While the robo-dozer can be remotely controlled, AIA claims it can even operate the system autonomously. As the Jerusalem Post reported last month, IAI says it can operate on several levels of autonomous independence, allowing it to dig trenches in the field, clear routes or difficult, otherwise impassable areas, and move large or suspicious obstacles. While the company stresses the platform ensures the safety of Israeli soldiers who no longer had to drive combat bulldozers in dangerous situations, it does not mention that the robo-dozer can identify and avoid civilians during autonomous operations. The Israeli military arms maker is also in the process of developing an unmanned M113 armored personnel carrier. So I guess, that would be like the driver doesn't have anybody in there, but you would assume that there would still be personnel in the personnel carrier. So combat bulldozers have played a major role in Israeli military operations in Gaza, where large swaths of the territory have been flattened by Israeli bombs. As the rubble is littered with unexploded munitions and potential Hamas-planted explosives, the IDF has used a large number of D9s to clear the region that were once cities in Gaza. Tel Aviv had declared a buffer zone along the borders of Gaza, and Defense Minister Israel Katz recently expanded that zone to include the entire southern city of Rafah. Israeli forces had destroyed most structures in those areas and kill any Palestinian who tries to approach. Katz said that Gaza will become smaller and more isolated, and more of its residents will be forced to evacuate from the fighting zones. Additionally, the IDF has built corridors that bisect the strip, flattening the infrastructure in those areas. Israel now controls over 50% of Gaza. And so let's talk about the different areas of Gaza a little bit more. This one I wrote for the Institute on April 22nd. Israel continues to issue evacuation orders in Gaza, but no new safe zones. So over the past month, the Israeli Defense Forces have forced many Gazans to flee their homes or shelters. However, Tel Aviv is not creating new humanitarian zones for the displaced Palestinians to shelter. So according to Haaretz, after Israel broke the ceasefire with Hamas on March 18th and resumed major military operations in Gaza, it has not designated any new safe zones in the Strip. Other areas previously classified as humanitarian zones have been bombed by the IDF nearly 24 times over the past month. Haaretz noted that Israel issued a map of Gaza that eliminated the humanitarian zones before the hostage and ceasefire deal came into effect on January 15th. After the ceasefire took hold, many Gazans sheltering in tents at designated safe zones left to go back to their homes, or the rubble of where their homes once stood. After Israel resumed operations in the Strip, many returned to the former humanitarian zones, even though Tel Aviv has not redesignated the areas. Since resuming military operations in Gaza, the IDF has also issued mass evacuation orders across the Strip. Israeli forces now control about 50% of Gaza. Many areas controlled by the IDF have effectively become kill zones where Palestinian civilians are gunned down for crossing into regions deemed off limits by Tel Aviv. The UN estimates that such no-go zones make up about 70% of Gaza. Additionally, the IDF appears to have made evacuation orders intentionally misleading. Professor Yaakov Garab of Israel's Ben Gurion University explained that Tel Aviv often post maps with evacuation orders that are upside down and lack sufficient detail. He actually said that Israel goes out of their way that when they post the maps on Twitter, you can't zoom in on them. And so the images look kind of low quality, and for anybody who doesn't speak Arabic or, understand what, the district maps of Gaza look like, the maps look relatively confusing and hard to figure out. I guess I had always assumed that, somebody from Gaza could probably figure it out. But according to this Israeli professor, that's not the case, that they intentionally make these maps, or at least it appears that they intentionally make these maps so low quality, so misleading, as to intentionally get the Palestinians to not understand where they're supposed to evacuate from and where they're supposed to go to. So many top Israeli officials have stated that Tel Aviv's goals in Gaza is not eliminating Hamas or freeing the hostages, but the removal of all Palestinians from the Strip. And then it makes a little bit more sense as to why they're not issuing new safe zones in humanitarian areas in Gaza, because they don't want people in a big tent camp city that's called a humanitarian zone, because they can't drive them off of them one day. So let's get into this a little bit more. Israel's small church says Gaza problem must be eliminated. Hostages are not the main priority. So on Monday, the Israeli finance minister Bezalel Smotrich said freeing the captives in Gaza was not the most important goal and called for the elimination of the Gaza problem. Smotrich, the leader of the far-right religious Zionism party, suggested that Israel has the opportunity to eliminate Gaza now that President Biden was out of office. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant had been fired, and members of the opposition party were out of the Israeli government. So Smotrich said in a radio interview, "We need to eliminate the Biden problem. We have a tremendous opportunity, and the excuses are gone. There's no Biden, no Gallant, no Gantz or Eisenkot. We must storm Gaza and end the problem and prove to the whole world, that the people of Israel, that there is military solution to terror." And this is something that, I probably haven't pointed out definitively enough on this show, that there are war people in the Israeli administration that I don't want to call them in any way as being soft, or saying that they were humanitarian or cared about the civilian population of Gaza. That's not what I'm saying. I am saying that they were less extreme than the people who are openly calling for a genocide. And this would include the former defense minister Yoav Gallant, as I said, Benny Gantz, Eisenkot, the former head of the chief of staff of the IDF, Herze Havale, and these, who would allow humanitarian aid to enter Gaza. So over the past, I want to say 6 months or so, most of those people have been removed from their posts and have been replaced by others. And so now the foreign minister is Gideon Sa'ar. Now the defense minister is Israel Katz. And while people often say, oh, there's far-right extremists in the Israeli government, now you have the national security minister, the finance minister, the defense minister, the effective secretary of state, the foreign minister, right? Just imagine if the people in the American government, if these main cabinet positions were people who are, such hard rightists. You wouldn't say that there are far-right extremists in the government. You would say that the government is a far-right extremist, pro-genocide government. And that's effectively what we have here. So Smotrich's comments on Monday angered family members of Israeli hostages in Gaza. The Hostages and Missing Family Forum said, according to Haaretz, the families have only one word for this morning: shame. At least the minister is revealing the harsh truth to the public. This government has consciously decided to abandon the hostages. Minister Smotrich, history will remember how you hardened your heart to your brothers and sisters in captivity and chose not to save them from such death and other disappearances. And while that is awful, I think history is probably going to remember him more as a genocidal maniac who is responsible in large part for one of the great, maybe the most atrocious crime of our century here. So next up here, not only do we have lunatics in the Israeli government, we have lunatics in the American government. Mike Huckabee, the U.S.'s new ambassador to Israel, responded to the World Health Organization asking him to pressure Israel to allow more humanitarian aid into Gaza by shifting the blame onto Hamas and backing Israel's collective punishment of the civilian population of Gaza. So in a video posted to X, Huckabee said, "What I would like to suggest is that we work together on putting the pressure where it really belongs, on Hamas." Huckabee called for Hamas to sign an agreement so humanitarian aid could go to the people of Gaza. He said when that happens and the Israeli hostages are released, then we hope that the humanitarian aid will flow freely, knowing that it could be done without Hamas. Now, of course, the problem is that Mike Huckabee is either an idiot or a liar, because Hamas has repeatedly offered, not just over the past couple of weeks, not just since Trump came into office, not just since late 2024, but really for well over a year now, Hamas has said that if Israel permanently ends its its assault on Gaza, then they will release all the hostages. It's Israel, it's Netanyahu, it's Tel Aviv that refuses to do so. The Times of Israel reported that Tel Aviv has a long-standing objection to releasing the hostages to Hamas releasing the hostages in exchange for a permanent ceasefire. They don't want that. Israel wants more. And as Betzal Smotrich had made it clear, what Israel wants is the complete elimination from Palestinians from Gaza. Now, just to emphasize this here, Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz said last week that no humanitarian aid would be entering Gaza and called the blockade on aid one of Israel's central pressure tools against Hamas. Katz also vowed an indefinite Israeli occupation of the territory that the IDF has captured in Gaza. He previously said that Israel was basically annexing the territory. I mean, he said they were beginning to annex the territory that they were taking in Gaza. So, I mean, that's explicit. Now, Huckabee's position, I guess, shouldn't be that surprising. He is an absolute lunatic. He was expected to staunchly back Israel's crimes against the Palestinians in his role as U.S. ambassador due to his history of pushing for the Israeli annexation of the West Bank, which he calls Judea and Samaria. He is a Christian Zionist who believes that the occupied Palestinian territory was given to the modern state of Israel by God. While visiting an Israeli settlement in the West Bank in 2017, Huckabee claimed that the territory was not under Israeli occupation. He told CNN, "I think Israel has the deed to Judea and Samaria. These are certain words I refuse to use. There is no such thing as the West Bank. It's Judea and Samaria. There's no such thing as a settlement. They're communities, they're neighborhoods, they're cities. There's no such thing as an occupation." Back in 2008, Huckabee said there's no such thing as a Palestinian and argued that Palestinians should be expelled to other Arab states, which, I mean, again, just absolutely disgusting. And when history looks back on the crime of this century, certainly the U.S. ambassador to Israel here, Mike Huckabee, is going to have a chapter in everybody's books explaining just how much he loved to watch Israel ethnically cleanse Gaza. So, it's not just Huckabee, it's not just most members of the Trump administration, but Donald Trump himself, who is an avowed Zionist. Trump speaks with Netanyahu, says they're on the same side of every issue. President Trump said on Tuesday that he spoke with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and that he and the Israeli leader were on the same side of every issue. Trump said in a post on Truth Social that they discussed numerous subjects, including trade, Iran, and more. The call comes after a report said Trump declined to back an Israeli plan to attack Iran, which would have required significant U.S. support, and chose to pursue a diplomatic deal with Iran instead. Another report said Israel was considering a limited attack on Iran without U.S. support, but final decision hasn't been made yet. Trump has been threatening to bomb Iran if a deal isn't reached on the nuclear program, even though his intelligence agencies have reaffirmed there's no evidence Iran is making a nuclear bomb. So according to Axios, Trump and Netanyahu have discussed Gaza and the potential for a deal and a ceasefire and hostage agreement. although there's no sign Israel is interested in a diplomatic solution and is refusing Hamas's offer to release all Israeli captives in exchange for a permanent ceasefire and an Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. The Trump administration has strongly backed Israel's decision to break the ceasefire agreement back in January, which resulted in the release of all Israeli hostages if implemented. Israel fully resumed its genocidal war on March 18th and imposed a total blockade on humanitarian aid and all other goods entering Gaza since March 2nd. Trump has signed off on at least $12 billion arms deals since returning to office in January. Over the weekend, Israeli media reports that U.S. delivered 9 plane loads of bunker-busting bombs and interceptors to Israel to prepare for a potential attack on Iran, but the bombs could also be dropped on Gaza. And so that story with this Ned story, I think are very important. Then I'll kind of explain why. Iran says Israel is trying to undermine Tehran's talks with the U.S. So the Iranian Foreign Ministry said on Monday that Israel was seeking to undermine Tehran's nuclear talks with Russia, comments that came after a report that said Israel was considering a limited attack on Iran. The Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman said a kind of coalition is forming to undermine and disrupt the diplomatic process, and that the Zionist regime is at the center of this effort. He added that Houthis in the U.S. are also involved in the effort to sabotage the talks. Alongside it are a series of warmongering currents in the United States and figures from different factions. So let's rewind a few years and think back to the beginning of the Obama administration. I believe it was actually in April of 2021 that Biden was supposed to open up talks, and these were going to be indirect talks with the Iranians on reestablishing the JCPOA, the nuclear deal that was signed, that was put together while Biden was Barack Obama's vice president. This was Barack Obama's maybe cornerstone foreign policy achievement, was the Iran nuclear deal. And what happened when Biden started to engage with the Iranians in talks? Israel started to hijack Iranian ships in the Mediterranean Sea and the Red Sea. They started to conduct sabotage attacks on Iranian nuclear and drone facilities. They started to launch drone strikes on Iranian drone facilities. These are in Iran. And maybe most provocatively, they started to conduct assassinations of Iran's nuclear scientists within Iran. And so just imagine if any of that happened in the United States, if say China assassinated a top US nuclear engineer, if China had, disrupted, bombed a US nuclear facility, if China had used a drone strike to bomb an American drone facility, these would be outrages. These would be calls to go to war. And so obviously Israel was intentionally undermining any potential nuclear negotiations between the US and Iran during the Biden administration. It seems that Israel is doing a similar thing this time around by putting out these reports that they're considering attacking Iran. So I do think this is concerning. My guess is that if the talks get more serious, if they start to move in a positive direction, then we're going to start to see Israel conduct more and more sabotage attacks, more and more assassinations against Iranians. Maybe a provocation like attacking another Iranian embassy somewhere in the Middle East, right? They want tensions with Iran to be extremely high, so a nuclear deal between the U.S. and Iran can't get done. Now, the reason Israel wants to prevent a nuclear deal between the U.S. and Iran isn't because Iran is attempting to build a nuclear weapon, as even the U.S. intelligence agencies admit. It's because Israel has spent decades propagandizing Americans to believe that Iran is on the cusp of building a nuclear bomb. And if the U.S. lifts the pressure, if the U.S. gives Israel even 10% less support, then Iran will make a nuclear weapon and wipe the Jewish state off the map. And so, with that propaganda firmly in place, and the reason Israel initially opposed the nuclear deal is because Israel doesn't want the West to develop economic and strong ties with Iran, even though there's plenty of reasons to do so, because of course Iran isn't making a nuclear weapon. And so now it kind of seems like the Trump administration has taken steps in the right direction, negotiating with the Iranians. But my concern is that these negotiations are on shaky footing, which will give Israel plenty of opportunity to undermine them. But most importantly, the Trump administration really isn't putting forward a workable deal with the Iranians. And if that's the case, a deal will not happen. Now, the real question is what happens from there? Does Israel actually conduct an attack on Iran? Do we actually end up going to war with Iran? Or do Washington and Tel Aviv just allow the tensions to simmer? That way the American people are fine with us throwing $20+ billion a year of military aid at Israel. Now, next up here, IDF chief tours occupied Syria, says long-term control is vital. So the new head of the IDF, Anzalone, toured the Israeli-occupied areas of southwest Syria on Sunday, speaking with commanders and approving new orders to continue military operations against the area into the future, suggesting a long-term stay is in the plans. And of course, this seems an awful lot like annexation. Now, this one from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com is interesting. U.S. plans to relocate troops in Kurdish-controlled Syria to 2 new military bases. So the U.S. plans to establish 2 new military bases in Kurdish-controlled Syria, where it will relocate troops as a part of a drawdown from its forces in the country. Rudaw, which is a Kurdish, I think a Iraqi Kurdish outlet, that reported on Monday. So a U.S. based member of the political wing of the U.S.-backed SDF said the U.S. will establish 1 new base near the Tarish Dam in northern Syria and another in the southern Deir ez-Zor province near the Iraqi border. The Tarish Dam has been the site of heavy fighting between the SDF and the Turkish-backed SNA. Under an integration deal, the SDF is handing over the dam to the Syrian government, which is led by Harit Tahrir al-Sham, an offshoot of al-Qaeda. So the Kurdish official said the U.S. plans to leave 400 troops in Kurdish-controlled areas of Syria. The U.S. also has bases in areas not controlled by the SDF, including Al-Tanf in southern Syria. From Al-Tanf, the U.S. helped militia Ibats to join the HTF offensive that ousted former Syrian President Bashar al-Assad from power. The Pentagon announced last week that it would pull more than 1,000 troops out of Syria as part of a consolidation of its forces in the country. Now, this sounds like a major withdrawal, but just remember that we only had 900, or we're supposed to only have 900 troops in Syria for about a decade. And then it was revealed last year under the Biden administration that number was ratcheted up to 2,000 at some point. It's really unclear of when that happened. So it seems that the Trump administration is just moving us back towards that 1,000 number that we had before. All right, last up here, Houthis shoot down another U.S. MQ-9 Reaper drone. And this is really wild at this point that they have shot down so many MQ-9 Reaper drones. So Yemeni air defenses have shot down another U.S. MQ-9 Reaper drone. The Houthis, officially known as Ansar Allah, announced on Tuesday as airstrikes continue to pound Yemen. Our Air Force shot down another hostile American MQ-9 Reaper drone while it was carrying out hostile mission in our airspace of our Hajj government, said a Houthi spokesman. According to the spokesman, Yemeni forces have shot down 7 U.S. MQ-9 Reaper drones this month and 22 since October of 2023. Now, 7 in 1 month is a lot, and there are multiple possibilities of what's happening here, and I don't want to rule out the possibility that this is just Pentagon incompetence, that even though they must know that these drones are very vulnerable to the Houthis' air defenses, they just are simply willing to put them over Yemen time and time again, even though they cost $30 million each. So it definitely, incompetence is a potential here. Another thing I was thinking is maybe they want these drones to effectively be targeted by the Houthi air defenses. Maybe they're having such a hard time locating the Houthi air defense positions that they wait until they get fire on a drone and then they figure out where it is and they come and bomb it with a F-16 or an F-18 or a B-2 or something like that. So I don't know. This is really crazy that the Houthis have shot down so many MQ-9 Reaper drones. When it first started happening, my assumption was that at times the U.S. military was just uh, operating the MQ-9s without enough discipline, that they were operating them at too low of an altitude, and that the Houthis were able to pit them off with like shoulder-fired anti-aircraft systems. But now it seems, you know, that it has to be more so than just, you know, single operational failures. And whatever the policy is, we are losing a lot of drones over the skies of Yemen. And the Houthis have some, at least apparently, some sophisticated air defenses. All right, everybody, that will do for the show today. I will have a lot to talk about with Keaton later today on the Kyle Anzalone Show, so be sure to subscribe to that channel. We will be live at 4:45 Eastern Time. Be sure to tune in. Thanks, everyone.